"You're not allowed in here." The security guard's voice was harsh, blocking their way. Lucas, single dad, pulled his daughter Sophie's hand back, face flushed red. Sophie looked up, eyes glistening with tears. "It's okay, Daddy. We can leave." Lucas squeezed his daughter's hand, swallowing hard. "Yeah, let's go." He turned around, his lean figure disappearing under the cold lights. The sound of high heels clicked across the marble floor, stopping right behind him. "Wait!" A female voice rang out, sharp but trembling. Clara Moretti, young CEO, stepped out of the crystal elevator. "No one has to leave," she said, eyes firm and resolute. No one in the lobby suspected that this very moment would change 3 lives forever. Lucas Kane, 35 years old, former Navy mechanic, now working night shifts as a factory worker. Tall but thin, hands calloused, eyes tired but warm when looking at his daughter. Sophie Kane, 7 years old, lively but shy in crowds. She often drew scribbles on scraps of paper to give to her father. The father and daughter came to Moretti headquarters to meet the legal department to file a complaint. The corporation's factory had dumped waste, forcing Sophie's school to close. Security chased them from the lobby, calling them bottom feeders. Lucas patiently prepared to leave, but it was Sophie's words, "It's okay, Daddy. We can leave," that pierced his heart. Clara, 28 years old, appeared, a young director just returned from an international business trip, witnessing everything. She stopped, deciding to intervene, something the Moretti family had never done. Listen to someone not of their class. Clara led the father and daughter to a private conference room, ignoring the disapproving looks from lower-level staff. Lucas sat quietly, still keeping his distance. But Sophie drew a flower on paper and slipped it into Clara's hand. Clara smiled softly, for the first time in years, holding an innocent gift, not a contract. When the father and daughter left, Clara stood silently looking at the drawing on the table, feeling something she'd never felt before. A small crack appeared in her frozen exterior. The encounter had shaken Clara more than she wanted to admit. She'd spent years building walls around herself, learning to see people as assets, problems, or opportunities. But Sophie's innocent gesture, a crumpled flower drawing given with pure generosity, had bypassed all her defenses. That evening, Clara sat in her penthouse office, unable to focus on the contract spread before her. Instead, she kept returning to the scene in the lobby, a father protecting his daughter's dignity while being humiliated, and that small voice saying, "It's okay, Daddy." How many times had Clara wanted to say those words to her own father before he died? How many times had she swallowed her feelings to maintain the family's perfect image? She pulled up the complaint Lucas had tried to file. The details were damning. Toxic waste from a Moretti subsidiary leaking into the groundwater near an elementary school. The school had been shut down for health concerns, displacing hundreds of children. Her brother Marco had buried the report, calling it minor operational issues that didn't warrant attention. But reading Lucas's carefully documented evidence, Clara realized this wasn't minor at all. Children were getting sick, families were suffering, and the Moretti Corporation was responsible. The next morning, Clara did something unprecedented. She called Lucas directly, using the contact information from his complaint. "Mr. Kane, this is Clara Moretti. I'd like to discuss your complaint further." There was a long pause. "Is this some kind of trick?" "No trick. I want to help fix this situation. Why would a Moretti help people like us?" Clara looked at Sophie's flower drawing on her desk. "Because someone reminded me that we're all just people." A trace of authenticity, Sophie's scribbled flower drawing that she gave to Clara. A child's simple gift that cracked through years of corporate coldness and reminded Clara of her humanity. Lucas agreed to meet, though his voice carried deep skepticism. Clara couldn't blame him. In his experience, people with power only helped when it benefited them. But as she prepared for their meeting, Clara realized she was doing this not for PR or strategy, but because for the first time in years, she felt like doing something actually mattered. Clara secretly arranged to meet Lucas again, wanting to better understand the factory and those affected. Lucas was hesitant, not trusting the CEO, but Sophie excitedly pulled her hand. "Miss Clara has pretty hair like a princess." They met at a small diner, Clara's first time sitting in such an ordinary space, surrounded by the smell of French fries and loud laughter. Lucas shared his story. After his wife died, he worked while raising his daughter alone. With Sophie's school closed, he worried she'd lose her place to learn. Clara listened without interrupting, eyes leaving her phone screen for the first time in years. Sophie pulled from her bag a misshapen cupcake. "I made this at school for you." Clara tried it. Too sweet, frosting messy everywhere. But she laughed for the first time since her father's funeral. Lucas watched that moment, something strange lighting up in his heart. They began meeting more often, Clara visiting the workers' neighborhood, Lucas showing her the polluted river. Clara remembered her childhood with her father. He used to say, "A good CEO doesn't just make money, they must keep the hearts of their people." One evening, the three sat around a rickety wooden table. Sophie drew Miss Clara standing between Daddy and me. Clara held the drawing with tears in her eyes, for the first time feeling she belonged somewhere outside the corporation. Lucas said softly, "You're not like them." Those words touched Clara's deepest core. The transformation wasn't immediate. Each meeting revealed more layers to both of them. Clara learned that Lucas had been a Navy mechanic before his wife Sarah died of cancer. He'd left the military to be there for Sophie full-time, taking whatever work he could find to keep them afloat. "She was everything," Lucas said one evening as they walked along the contaminated riverbank. "Smart, funny, believed in making the world better. Before she died, she made me promise I'd never let Sophie grow up thinking the world was just a cruel place. And you've kept that promise." "I try, but it's hard when people like your security guards treat us like we're worthless." Clara felt shame burn through her. "I'm sorry. That should never have happened. It's not your fault personally, but it's the system you represent. Then help me change the system." Lucas looked at her skeptically. "One CEO can't change an entire corporate culture." "Maybe not, but I can start with one polluted river and one closed school." Sophie had been collecting rocks along the shore, but now she ran back with a handful. "Look, I found pretty ones for both of you." She distributed her treasures, smooth river stones that somehow had escaped the pollution. Clara and Lucas each received 3, and Sophie kept 3 for herself. "Now we all have the same," Sophie announced with satisfaction. Clara stared at the stones in her palm, worth nothing monetarily, but given with such pure intention. In her world, gifts were strategic, expensive watches, designer accessories, things meant to impress or obligate. But these rocks, chosen carefully by a 7-year-old who wanted everyone to have equal beauty, meant more than any corporate gift she'd ever received. Over the following weeks, their meetings became routine. Clara would finish her official duties, then drive to Lucas's neighborhood. She learned to eat at diners, to drink coffee from chip mugs, to sit on second-hand furniture without thinking about its monetary value. Lucas, in turn, taught her about the real cost of corporate decisions. He introduced her to families affected by the pollution, children with respiratory issues, parents struggling with medical bills, elderly residents who'd seen their neighborhood decay. "This is what your quarterly reports don't show," Lucas said, introducing Clara to a mother whose son had asthma from the contaminated air. "These are the externalized costs." Clara felt increasingly ashamed of how disconnected she'd been, but she also felt energized. For the first time, she was doing work that mattered beyond shareholder value. One afternoon, Sophie asked Clara to help with her homework, a project about community heroes. "Who's your hero?" Clara asked. "Daddy, because he takes care of me even when it's hard." "Who's your hero?" Clara thought about her father, about the man he'd been before the corporation consumed him. "My father used to be. He taught me that business should serve people, not the other way around." "Then you should be like him." The good parts. The simple wisdom from a 7-year-old hit Clara like a revelation. She'd spent so long trying to live up to her family's expectations that she'd forgotten her father's actual values, the ones he'd held before power corrupted them. That evening, as Clara prepared to leave, Sophie hugged her unexpectedly. "I'm glad you're our friend now." Clara held the small girl, feeling emotions she'd buried for years. "I'm glad too, sweetheart." Lucas walked Clara to her car, a vehicle that cost more than he'd make in 5 years, parked in a neighborhood where most people took the bus. "You don't have to do this, you know," he said, "slumming with us to feel better about your privilege." Clara turned to him, stung by the accusation. "Is that what you think this is?" "I don't know what to think. I don't know why someone like you would care about people like us. Because Sophie gave me a flower drawing, and it reminded me I used to be human. Because every time I come here, I remember there's more to life than quarterly earnings. Because—" She paused, surprised by her own honesty. "Because you and Sophie make me feel like I matter for who I am, not what I own." Lucas studied her face, searching for deception. Whatever he saw made him relax slightly. "Okay, I believe you. But Clara, this can't just be about feeling good. If you really want to help, you have to be willing to fight your own family." "I know, and I'm ready." A trace of authenticity, the misshapen cupcake Sophie gave Clara, which she ate completely despite it being too sweet and messy, savoring every bite because it was made with love rather than purchased with money. News spread. Clara was secretly meeting with workers, infuriating the family board. Marco Moretti, her brother, accused Clara of betrayal and demanded her removal from power. In a closed meeting, Marco presented fabricated evidence to undermine Clara, planning to expose it to the media. Clara trembled, nearly collapsing, but Lucas unexpectedly appeared, bringing the real images. The polluting factory, sick children. Marco roared, "That garbage has no voice here." Lucas stepped forward, standing in front of Clara. "Try touching her and see." His voice resonated throughout the room. Security guards rushed forward but were knocked down by Lucas's precise, swift movements. Clara watched the scene, no longer seeing Lucas as just a poor, single dad, but as a living wall protecting her. Marco shouted, "You'll regret opposing the Moretti family." Clara stood up, voice trembling but firm. "No, you're the one who'll have regrets." She turned on the screen, projecting all the evidence Lucas had brought before the board. Every member was stunned. Some avoided eye contact. Marco left in fury, his proud figure trembling for the first time. Clara sat down, her trembling hands steadied by Lucas's warm touch, like an anchor holding her fast. The confrontation had been building for weeks. Clara had been quietly gathering evidence, preparing her case, but Marco had moved faster. He'd used his influence with the board to call an emergency meeting, presenting doctored reports that made Clara look incompetent and emotionally unstable. "She's been compromised," Marco had declared dramatically. "Meeting secretly with disgruntled workers, making promises we can't keep, jeopardizing our shareholder value over sentimental nonsense." The board members, mostly old men loyal to Marco, nodded in agreement. Clara felt the walls closing in, felt the weight of generations of Moretti power being used to crush her. That's when the conference room doors burst open. Lucas strode in, Sophie's hand in his, carrying a banker's box full of documents. Security tried to stop him, but something in his bearing, the confidence of someone who'd faced much worse than corporate guards, made them hesitate. "This meeting is private," Marco snarled. "Not anymore," Lucas replied. He dumped the box's contents on the conference table. "Everything you need to know about Moretti Industries' environmental crimes, medical records of sick children, water quality reports, internal emails where your staff knew about the contamination and covered it up." Marco lunged forward trying to grab the documents, but Lucas caught his wrist with the easy competence of someone trained in combat. "I wouldn't do that," Lucas said quietly. "How dare you, a nobody, come into this boardroom?" "I'm not a nobody. I'm a father whose daughter's school was poisoned by your greed. And I'm someone who knows exactly how to make sure this information reaches every media outlet in the country if anything happens to Clara." Clara found her voice. "He's not alone. I've been documenting everything. If you try to remove me, if you try to bury this, it all goes public. And the Moretti name, the legacy you care so much about, becomes synonymous with poisoning children." One board member, an elderly woman who'd known Clara's father, spoke up. "Is this true, Marco? Did you know about the contamination? It's being handled through proper channels." "Proper channels?" Clara pulled up emails on the screen. "These are your emails ordering staff to delay remediation because it would impact quarterly earnings. You chose profit over children's health. The room erupted in chaos. Some board members were furious at Marco, others at Clara for airing dirty laundry, still others simply calculating which side would benefit them most. In the midst of it all, Sophie stood quietly beside her father, holding Clara's crumpled flower, drawing that Lucas had brought as a reminder of why they were fighting. "Stop," the elderly board member said, her voice cutting through the noise. "All of you, stop." Everyone fell silent. "I knew Antonio Moretti," she said, referring to Clara's late father. "He built this company on principles of community responsibility. He believed that a corporation's first duty was to the people it served. And somewhere along the way, we forgot that." She turned to Clara. "What do you propose?" Clara took a deep breath. "Immediate cleanup of the contaminated site, medical monitoring for all affected families, investment in local schools and infrastructure, and most importantly, a fundamental restructuring of how we evaluate success, not just profit, but community impact." "That will cost billions," Marco protested. "And how much will it cost when the lawsuits come?" Lucas interjected. "When the government investigations start? When consumers boycott every Moretti product because you're the company that poisons kids?" The math was clear, even to those who only cared about money. One by one, board members began nodding. Marco's fabricated case collapsed under the weight of real evidence and moral outrage. "Meeting adjourned," the elderly board member declared. "Clara remains as CEO. Marco, you're on administrative leave pending a full investigation." Marco's face went purple with rage. As he stormed out, he hissed at Clara. "You've destroyed this family." "No," Clara replied. "I'm saving it." After everyone left, Clara collapsed into a chair, the adrenaline finally leaving her system. Lucas knelt beside her, Sophie climbing onto her lap. "You did it," Lucas said. "We did it," Clara corrected. "What happens now?" Clara looked at the evidence scattered across the conference table, at Sophie's innocent drawing still clutched in her hand, at Lucas's steady presence beside her. "Now we rebuild. Not just the river and the school, but everything. A company my father would be proud of." Sophie looked up at Clara. "Does this mean I can go back to school?" "Yes, sweetheart, and it's going to be even better than before." That evening, the three of them stood on a bridge overlooking the contaminated river. In the fading light, it looked deceptively peaceful. "This will take years to clean up," Lucas observed. "Then we have years of work ahead of us," Clara replied. "We?" Clara turned to him. "I can't do this alone. I need people who understand what's at stake, people who won't let me forget why this matters. I'm a factory worker, not a corporate executive. You're someone who fights for what's right. That's more valuable than any MBA." As they walked back to Lucas's neighborhood, Sophie between them holding both their hands, Clara realized she'd made her choice. Not between family and conscience, not between power and principles, but a choice to build something better from the wreckage of what had been. And for the first time since her father died, she felt like she was finally on the right path. Clara was allowed to keep her CEO position, but she chose a different direction, launching a fund for environmental restoration and education. Factories were required to undergo renovation, rivers gradually being cleaned. Lucas and the workers were invited to participate in the project, for the first time feeling their voices had value. Sophie ran around the newly built garden by the river, shouting, "The water's clean now, Daddy." Clara followed, smiling softly, a genuine smile. Lucas repaired the fence while Clara brought him water. Two worlds once far apart now building together. One evening, Sophie whispered, "Daddy will miss Clara leave." Lucas fell silent, not daring to answer. Clara heard, gently touching the child's hand, "If you want me to, I'll stay." On the fund's anniversary, Clara publicly declared, "This corporation doesn't belong only to the Morettis, but to every family." Applause thundered through the room. Lucas stood in the back, eyes full of pride. Clara turned back, catching that look, like an unspoken promise. The transformation of Moretti Industries wasn't easy or quick. There were lawsuits from affected families, investigations from environmental agencies, and constant attacks from Marco's supporters who saw Clara's reforms as weakness. But Clara persevered, guided by an unlikely team. Lucas's practical understanding of workers' needs, Sophie's innocent reminders of what really mattered, and her own renewed sense of purpose. The river cleanup became a community effort. Clara didn't just hire contractors. She employed local workers, taught them environmental restoration skills, and paid them fair wages. Lucas coordinated the teams, his military leadership experience proving invaluable. "You're good at this," Clara observed one day as she watched him organize a complicated phase of the cleanup. "I led men in worse situations than toxic rivers," Lucas replied. "At least here, nobody's shooting at us. Is it strange, going from combat to corporate environmental work?" "Not really. Both are about protecting people, just different enemies." Sophie had become the unofficial mascot of the restoration project. She'd draw pictures for the workers, lead tours for visiting school groups, and generally remind everyone why they were doing this difficult work. "We're making the river happy again," she'd explain to other children, "so the fish can come back and the water won't make people sick." Her simple explanations often cut through the technical jargon better than any corporate presentation. One afternoon, Clara found Lucas teaching Sophie to plant native vegetation along the restored riverbank. "These plants will filter the water," he explained, "and give homes to birds and insects." "Like we're building houses for nature?" "Exactly like that," Clara joined them, kneeling in the dirt in her expensive pantsuit, something she'd never have done a year ago. "Can I help?" she asked. Sophie immediately handed her a small plant. "You put it in the hole and cover it with dirt. Then you have to promise to take care of it." "I promise," Clara said solemnly, following Sophie's instructions. As they worked together, dirt under their nails and sun on their faces, Clara realized this felt more real than any boardroom victory ever had. Later, Lucas walked Clara back to her car. "You're different now," he observed. "How so?" "When I first met you, you were all sharp edges and corporate speak. Now you're softer, more human. Is that good or bad?" "It's real, and real is always better." Clara studied this man who'd burst into her life uninvited and somehow become essential. "Lucas, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why did you really come to that board meeting? You could have just given me the evidence." Lucas looked at the river they'd been working to restore. "Because I saw you standing alone against your whole family. And I know what that feels like. I couldn't let you fight that battle by yourself. Even though we barely knew each other?" "Sophie liked you." "That's a pretty good recommendation." They both laughed, the sound carrying across the evening air. 6 months into the restoration project, the elementary school reopened with upgraded facilities funded by Moretti Industries. The celebration was massive. Families, workers, politicians, and media all gathering to mark the occasion. Clara gave a speech, but she kept it short. The real star was Sophie, who cut the ribbon alongside other children from the school. "This is just the beginning," Clara told the crowd. "Moretti Industries is committed to being a force for good in this community and beyond." Later, at a smaller gathering for the project team, Lucas raised a glass. "To Clara, who proved that corporations can have a conscience." "To Lucas," Clara responded, "who taught me what's worth fighting for." "To both of you," Sophie chimed in with her juice box, "for making the river happy." Everyone laughed and drank to that. As the party wound down, Clara found herself on the riverbank with Lucas, watching the sunset reflect off water that was finally beginning to clear. "What happens now?" Lucas asked. "We keep going. More projects, more communities, more lives improved." "And personally," Clara turned to him, "what do you want to happen personally?" "I want—" Lucas hesitated, unusual for a man usually so direct. "I want to know if this is real, if what I'm feeling is something you feel too." Clara's heart raced. "And what are you feeling?" "Like I found something I didn't know I was looking for. Like you and Sophie have become the best parts of my day. Like maybe if you're interested, we could be more than just partners in environmental cleanup." Clara smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'd like that very much." One morning, sunlight streamed through the glass windows of headquarters, shining on the lobby where it all began. Clara held Sophie's hand while Lucas walked behind them, no longer the person being chased away. Sophie held up a new drawing. "Daddy, Miss Clara, and a small house beside a blue river. Clara hugged the paper, whispering, "More beautiful than any contract I've ever signed." On her desk, the velvet box containing the family ring remained closed, but beside it was a child's drawing. Clara looked at Lucas, eyes determined. "If you two still need me, I want to stay." Lucas smiled softly, removing a wooden keychain carved like a boat and giving it to her. "Welcome home." Sophie rushed to hug both of them, laughter filling the glass room. Outside, the Moretti River Restoration Project began construction, excavators roaring to life. Clara stepped onto the balcony, looking up at the clear blue sky, thinking, "Father, I've chosen again." Lucas stood behind her, whispering, "Family isn't where you're born, but where you choose each other every day." The story ends here, leaving a light of hope for a corporation once drowning in darkness. 1 year after that first encounter in the lobby, Clara stood in the same spot, but everything had changed. The marble floors still gleamed, the crystal chandeliers still sparkled, but the atmosphere was completely different. Workers moved through the building with confidence rather than fear. Community representatives had offices on the executive floor, and Sophie's drawings hung in the main conference room, reminding everyone what they were working toward. Marco had been removed from all positions of authority, facing criminal charges for the cover-up. Some board members had resigned, unable to adapt to Clara's new direction, but others had embraced it, discovering that doing good could also be good business. The Moretti River restoration was ahead of schedule. Fish had returned to waters that were clean for the first time in decades. Property values were rising as the neighborhood became desirable again, and Sophie's school had become a model for environmental education. "We did it," Lucas said, standing beside Clara as they watched construction crews put finishing touches on a new community center. "We're doing it," Clara corrected. "This isn't finished. It's ongoing." "Fair point." Sophie ran up to them, covered in paint from the art class Clara had sponsored. "Look what I made." It was a family portrait. Lucas, Clara, and Sophie standing in front of a house with a garden. "That's us?" Clara asked. "That's us in our new house. The one Daddy said we might get now that he has a better job." Clara and Lucas had discussed this. Lucas had accepted a position as Director of Community Relations at Moretti Industries, a role that perfectly suited his skills and values. "Would you like that?" Clara asked. "A house with a garden?" "Only if you're there too," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "We're a family now." Clara looked at Lucas, who nodded encouragingly. "Actually," Clara said, kneeling to Sophie's level, "I've been thinking about that. About families and what makes them real." "And," Sophie bounced excitedly, "and I think families are made of people who choose each other, who show up for each other, who make each other better. Like us." "Exactly like us. So yes, sweetheart, I'll be there in the house with the garden, if you and your daddy want me." Sophie squealed and threw her arms around Clara. Lucas pulled them both into a hug, the three of them standing in the lobby where their story had begun, now transformed into something beautiful. That evening, they walked along the restored riverbank, clean water flowing, native plants thriving, birds singing in the trees they'd planted. "Your father would be proud," Lucas said to Clara. "I hope so. I'm trying to build the company he dreamed of, not the one it became." "You're succeeding." Clara stopped walking, taking in the scene. Children playing safely by the water, families picnicking on the grass, a community restored. "No," she said, "we're succeeding. All of us together." Sophie ran ahead, then turned back to wave at them. "Come on, the sunset's starting." They ran to catch up with her, and as the three of them stood watching the sun set over water that finally ran clear, Clara understood that she'd found something more valuable than any corporate empire. She'd found home. If you believe healing stories like this deserve to be shared, please leave a comment and subscribe to Hidden Heart Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.